Welcome everyone to the 9th episode of Ability Academy. Today we'll be taking a look at the Poison Point, Poison Touch, Stench, Neutralizing Gas, Liquid Ooze, Poison Heal, Merciless, Corrosion, Power of Alchemy, and Toxic Debris abilities. The Poison Point ability is a relatively primitive form of defense generally utilized by poison types to make any direct contact a risky move in battle. Pokémon possession of this ability tend to possess some sort of spiked or otherwise sharp armament on their body, including horns, barbs, and thorns, that naturally contain and steadily leak a potent poison of some sort the possessor's body generates for defense against potential enemies of all sorts. This is the key difference that separates the ability from the Poison Touch ability, despite seemingly being very similar to one another. This ability is meant to be passive and defensive in nature, designed for Poison-type Pokémon that tend to use their toxic powers more for tactical and defensive ploys than purely offensive, and thus can only be triggered if the possessor is struck with an attack that makes direct contact with their body. Because the implements that secrete poison in this instance are meant to be defensive in nature, when a target comes into direct physical contact with the possessor, these pointed implements are driven forcefully into their opponent's bodies and poison is then released, flowing into the open wound of the attacker quickly and efficiently. While this generally does little else other than make an attacker slightly sick or inflict minimal pain, about 30% of the time, enough poison can be injected into the attacker's bloodstream from the impact to inflict poisoning as a status condition. The Poison Point ability is a simple but powerful method of self-defense that enables the possessor to potentially leave a nasty present for any Pokemon willing to use direct attacks to deal damage. While it might not have the capacity to become a purely offensive weapon, this relatively decent chance of poisoning is nonetheless a great passive defensive trait that can keep Pokemon with otherwise poor physical defenses safer from direct attack. However, it is known that direct contact with a human trainer can have equally devastating effects if one is not careful about how they touch a Pokemon with this ability, making protective gear incredibly important when handling any of these sorts of beasts directly. The Poison Touch ability is a slightly more advanced version of the Poison Point ability that trades its capabilities as a defensive trait for the chance to make it an offensive weapon. As such, this ability is generally possessed by Pokemon that always have some sort of poison seeping from their bodies, but moreover, tend to have them seep from the parts of their bodies that are used primarily for attacking others with, able to release copious amounts of toxins from their bodies when attacking directly without seriously depleting their poison reserves in the process. This is the key difference that separates the ability from the Poison Point ability, despite seemingly being very similar to one another. This ability is meant to be offensive in nature, designed for poison-type Pokemon that use their toxic powers more for offensive ploys than defensive or tactical, and thus can only be triggered if the possessor strikes with an attack that makes direct contact with the opposition. Aside from allowing the possessor to reduce the amount of poison used in battle overall, this ability has the same effect as the Poison Point ability in that it will ensure that it injects otherwise forces poison released from their bodies to seep into the skin and armor of anything that they strike with a direct attack. While this may only be enough to cause some infections, there is a 30% chance of actually inflicting poisoning as a status condition within a target when the possessor attacks them with a direct blow, allowing the condition to weaken them further and wreak havoc with their bodies. While it might not be as useful as a passive weapon like the Poison Point ability, the Poison Touch ability is far better suited for trainers that prefer to fight offensively instead of defensively, and can easily give otherwise mediocre attacks a nasty bite that few opponents will be able to see coming before it's too late, and in turn enticing them to stay as far away from any Pokemon possessing the ability as possible, and keep the possessor equally safe from direct attack. The Stench ability, which is exclusive to Poison-type Pokemon, is a fairly disgusting ability that is derived from the foul chemical odors that are produced by certain Poison-type Pokemon, either as a natural defensive attribute, as is the case with Gloom as a hidden ability and the members of the Stunky family, or simply as a biological byproduct of the natural chemical processes that other Pokemon use to produce energy, expelling the gas as a waste product in the process. This is pretty common for Poison-type Pokemon with an amorphous body form and that thrive in toxic environments, with the members of the Cantoni and Grimer, Coughing, and Trubbish families being the only ones that produce a stench so strong that it can count as a passive ability for them. This foul odor has a tendency to produce strong reactions within those that smell it even outside of battle, the horrid and literal stench driving others away in droves. In battle, this ability does not add much in the way of offense or defense to the possessor, but if the possessor manages to hit the opponent with any sort of attack, the sheer proximity of the foul odor coming off from them can be enough to be wielded with the opposition and cause them to lose their focus in battle, in turn causing them to flinch about 10% of the time, though the effect does not stack with held items. Outside of battle, this aroma can equally drive away wild Pokemon with great vigor in some circumstances, especially in confined spaces, and, as long as the possessor is at the front of a party or otherwise outside its capture device, the chances of encountering wild Pokemon in such situations will be decreased by 50%. The fact this ability can cause other Pokemon to flinch even if only on occasion, makes it a decent offensive tool when used properly, and can certainly drive the opponent a bit batty from the smell alone, even if it has no impact in battle otherwise. Moreover, the power of this smell is great for chasing off wild Pokemon in confined spaces, in turn making it much easier to travel through otherwise densely packed places like a forest without worrying too much about being attacked. However, because the Stench ability does drive wild Pokemon away in droves, it can equally be frustrating to trainers attempting to battle or capture wild Pokemon. Moreover, the Stench itself is something that is far from ineffective to humans, so having to care for the Pokemon in possession of this ability can be hard if you have to hold your breath continuously in order to interact with them, which can put a potential strain on the bond between a human trainer and their Pokemon. The Neutralizing Gas ability is the signature ability of the Coughing family, and is a perfect representation of the strange nature of the toxic gases they can produce within their bodies. While the members of this particular family are known for being able to generate a myriad array of toxic gases that they can use to poison and disorient others with little issue, in the case of specimens with this ability, while it is active, these creatures can actually naturally produce a powerful toxin-laced gas from the bodies that, while not capable of harming others, contains a combination of chemical paralytics and nerve disruptors that can mess with everyone on the battlefield and weaken their capacity to make the most of their natural powers. This potent mixture has the capacity to disable the natural abilities of anything that inhales it, and thus provides these toxic fiends a devious weapon to use against ability-oriented strategists. As such, as a consequence of the unique combination of toxins contained within this gas, as long as this ability is active and the possessor is in battle, the toxic gas will cover the entire area and effectively nullify the abilities of all present Pokemon, disabling vital functions and preventing them from making full use of their natural bodies in the process. This ability is the perfect way to disrupt any and all strategies that might require the abilities of Pokemon in order to pull off, and while its limitation to the members of the Coughing family might hold it back a bit, this is still a terrific ability to have access to when an opponent's ability-based strategy needs to be shut down immediately. However, because the ability is all-encompassing, it will have the same effect on Pokemon on the possessor's side of the field, potentially disrupting one's own strategies if they rely on abilities to work as well. The Liquid Ooze ability is a fairly rare ability possessed only by the members of the Tentacool and Gulpin families, and therefore is also exclusive to Poison-type Pokemon as a result of the way in which they store their toxins. Anatomically, these creatures are slightly different from other poison types in that they naturally come into contact with their own toxins internally on a regular basis and are therefore both immune to them and slightly sustained by them. This has resulted in their own toxins permeating through their bodies almost entirely, with even the blood that sustains them containing potent toxins that can make other Pokemon deathly ill if they are ingested for any reason. This helps to deter any creature that might otherwise wish to dine on them if they do not have access to antibodies of some sort to shut down and destroy these toxins in turn, and it renders Pokemon in possession of this ability a severe hazard to anyone that would try to drain physical liquids or energy from the systems with an attack. As such, when Pokemon in possession of this ability are attacked by moves that directly deal damage and sap energy from them, they will still receive damage from the attack, but because of the toxins that flow throughout every part of their body, their attacker is nonetheless left with a nasty surprise. When the vital liquids or energy is taken from the ability's possessor, their internal toxins are taken as well, which then proceed to harm the attacker and deplete their energy by the same amount they would have normally gained from that attack. Although the Pokemon capable of possessing this ability are already resistant against the types of attacks this ability is designed to counter, the fact that such energy-draining moves are found among more than just Cross-type specialists can nonetheless make it a decent tool in preventing an opponent from becoming a recovery wall of sorts, slowly sapping their energy instead of having them recover enough for them to keep on fighting. The Poison Heal ability is a rare and strikingly unique ability that only the members of the Shroomish family can only possess, though Gliscor may rarely inherit this ability as well. Unlike most Pokemon that either have a potential immunity to the effects of being poisoned in some form or otherwise show resistance to its effects, Pokemon in possession of the Poison Heal ability have the capacity to metabolically absorb and process toxins received from another life form and break them down internally to convert them into harmless waste products and energy for use in battle, even if the toxins used on them are generally lethal in small doses. This defensive power is mainly thought to have arisen among the members of the Shroomish family as a consequence of the fungal forms developing to ward off beasts like Wurmple in regions like the Hoenn region, allowing them to make use of the limited physical attacks as juveniles to fight back against them. Whereas with Gliscor, it seems to be the result of the development of their rare immunity ability as Gligar, not making them immune to the condition, but instead developing powerful antibodies that work the same as with the Shroomish family, thus turning the condition into one of healing rather than harm. While the possession of this ability does not necessarily mean that a Pokemon is immune to being poisoned or even badly poisoned, it does mean that it will not take damage from the condition. Moreover, as long as they are inflicted with a poison condition of any sort, the antibodies and other systems in place inside these beasts will break down any toxins that are introduced into their systems, causing them to recover about 12.5% of the maximum HP every combat turn in battle instead of taking damage. The poison heal ability may only have an effect when the possessor is poisoned or badly poisoned, but this nonetheless shuts down any attempts that the opponent makes to inflict steady pain on a target with toxins, and effectively turns their tactics right back at them. Moreover, this ability is one of the few reasons why trainers may carry around an otherwise dangerous toxic orb, as the item can easily turn a Pokémon in possession of this ability into a self-healing nightmare in battle. The Merciless ability is a signature ability of Marini and Toxapex, and serves as a representation of their ruthless behavior and devastating toxins in battle. While these creatures can use their powerful toxins in sturdy forms to outlast others for the sake of their survival, their actions towards Pokémon like Corsola, who are not a threat to any life form in the ocean, oftentimes make them look like they are heartless, and they seem to have taken a liking to this psychologically to some degree. If in possession of this ability, and if these Pokémon are put into a position where their opponent has been poisoned, these beasts will not hesitate to take the time to quickly observe where their opponent is experiencing the most pain from the effects of poisoning, and will purposefully target this point when attacking. This can often serve as a great boon for them, as they otherwise do not have access to the strongest of offenses naturally, so being able to exploit critical weak points can often be necessary for their survival. Due to their often ruthless nature as highlighted in this ability, if they find that their opponent is sick with poison and is in bad health, while the target is in this weakened state, the attacks used by these Pokémon against their poisoned opponents will always result in critical hits as they strike vital weak points, in turn dealing more damage than the otherwise weak offensive stats might allow them to. The Merciless ability might be preventable by moves and other abilities that prevent critical hits, but this ability suits the members of the Marini family perfectly, as their primary means of tactical use revolve around them poisoning targets, and considering that they learn the Venoshock attack naturally, this ability can certainly make it more than easy for them to take full advantage of a poisoned opponent and deal devastating damage to them, no matter what defensive measures they may have taken. The Corrosion ability normally serves as a signature ability for the Salandit family, but can also be found among the members of the Glimmet family in rare cases, as well as a consequence of the radioactive nature, and more than makes them and their poisons a lethal force in any battle. While the poison and badly poisoned status conditions are infamous for the debilitating effects they can have against Pokémon in battle, Steel and Poison-type Pokémon are normally immune to their effects. However, for these organisms, the situation can honestly be quite different. When these creatures create their signature toxins, they're often super concentrated internally before being released as a thick toxic gas cloud that is incredibly noxious and acidic, and when it touches or is inhaled by any other creature in battle, it can readily seep into the systems and bypass, or even outright destroy, the normal antibody systems that would otherwise stave off any effects from poison in the slightest, and this includes the metallic armor of many Steel-type Pokémon. This helps to give these beasts a serious edge against the tough and rugged Pokémon that otherwise like to occupy their territory and ensure that their powerful toxins will always work as intended. As such, thanks to the extreme concentration level of the toxins featured in the poison-type moves of Pokémon in possession of this ability, it ensures that said toxins sink into the flesh of their target readily and bypass or destroy their antibodies and armor-based defenses, allowing these creatures to be poisoned and badly poisoned like any other Pokémon. The use of moves that inflict poisoning or badly poisoned conditions on opponents in battle is a common tactical theme and has been since the beginning of Pokémon battles, and while it was assumed that poison steel types were always safe from these conditions, the Corrosion ability helps to flip that idea completely on its head and establish a battlefield where any and all targets can be victimized with them, allowing those in possession of this ability to make the most of the debilitating conditions when fighting back with their other offenses as their opponent is suffering. It is at least noted though that this ability cannot override the effects of the immunity ability, so it is not completely foolproof. The Power of Alchemy ability is a hidden ability available only to the members of the Alolan Grimer family, and is a strong representation of the weird ways in which their Alolan diet has changed them. In the processing of a wide variety of different types of garbage and waste product in general, the bacteria that comprise the consciousness of these creatures may sometimes adapt the capacity to wield a limited degree of extrasensory power, something that was thought to be impossible for Pokémon like Grimer and Muk. While this extrasensory power cannot be used by them directly as an attack in combat, if they are in a multi-Pokémon battle and an ally faints in battle, it will trigger an involuntary reaction within them if they possess the ability that causes them to begin to produce elemental energies and physical objects from the garbage stored inside of them, resulting in them mimicking the ability of their fallen comrade and being able to then use the ability for any purpose they see fit. In other words, although this ability does not normally provide any notable benefits, as those in possession of this ability will leave their partner to do what they must in battle without interfering, if their ally does faint in battle, these creatures and the involuntary reactions described already will be triggered, causing them to take over the position formerly occupied by their ally and take their ability for their own, effectively copying the ability of their fallen comrade and activating it immediately in battle from that point on, with only a handful of exceptions. The power of Alchemy ability is a crafty tactical ability that can easily be used to set up ability-based sweeps in battle, especially if used to take advantage of abilities whose effects can be compounded with repeated activations like Intimidate. The ability can still be a bit temperamental if not utilized properly, but it nonetheless can give the possessor a major advantage in battle and help carry on the good fight which their fallen comrade had otherwise failed to win. However, the fact that the ability copies the ability of a fallen ally can be a problem if the ally possessed a debilitating ability like Truant or Defeatist, and thus caution must be exercised when using a Pokémon with this ability in a multi-Pokémon battle. The Toxic Debris ability is the signature ability of the Glimmet family and serves as a terrifying passive weapon to anyone that tries to make direct contact with them. The radioactive toxic crystals that grow like petals on these beasts are not all that sturdy and can be damaged rather easily, but doing so can cause the crystals to shatter and spread their toxic shards all over the area in front of these beasts. This seems to be a purposeful defensive mechanism for these creatures, as while they're not exactly the weakest of beasts, their defensive attributes are middling at best, so this added hazard is not just a part of the natural biology, but also an attribute that can ward off others to ensure that they don't try and attack these creatures with physical blows. Because the toxic crystals that grow on these creatures can easily be shaken off with physical contact, if a Pokémon with this ability is struck by a physical attack, it will cause their crystallized toxins to be splintered into shards that will then cover the opposing side of the battlefield, effectively spraying the equivalent of toxic spikes on that side of the field in the process. This ability is the perfect way for these toxin-laden beasts to make life hectic for others that think they can at least stay away from their toxin-laden bodies and be safe in the process. It can be circumvented by avoiding direct contact, but anything else other than this can ensure the opposing field will have a hard time avoiding any chance of poisoning if they have to switch out their Pokémon. That's it for this episode, so stay tuned for the next episode of Ability Academy. Thank you all for watching this video. It is a great pleasure to share with you all the fruits of my research and all the positives it gives to understanding the wonderful creatures we call Pokémon and how their powers and behaviors function in their world. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more work like it, please give a like, comment, and or subscribe to the channel so you can get regular notifications on when new content is being uploaded. You can also find links to my DeviantArt page, Patreon, and Discord server in the description below. Please, join me on this road to seeing what the world of Pokemon has to share with us, and the many mysteries and wonders that keep us all coming back for more.